$200 million. That's what a billionaire CEO would offer a waitress's son in exchange for proving his worth. But what he said next left everyone speechless. This is the story of how one cruel challenge exposed a secret that would change 3 lives forever. The morning rain had just stopped painting Dallas streets when Clara Monroe tied her apron strings for another shift at Maplewood Diner. At 41, she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to carry invisible weight. Every step between tables, every refilled coffee cup, every forced smile, it all served one purpose. The MIT acceptance letter crinkled softly in her apron pocket. Ryan Monroe, her 18-year-old son, sat hunched over textbooks at the corner booth, same as every morning before school. Dark hair falling over focused eyes, he scribbled equations that would make most adults dizzy. Clara watched him with that mix of pride and heartbreak only mothers know. He had her stubborn chin and something else, an intelligence that seemed to burn from somewhere deeper than genes. "Mom, you're staring again," Ryan said without looking up, a half smile tugging at his lips. "Can't help it. My son's going to MIT. The words felt like prayer and punishment at once. $43,000 a year. She made $26,000 on her best year. But hope was all she had left to give him. The bell above the diner door chimed and everything changed. A man in an Italian suit stepped through, shaking raindrops from his shoulders like he owned the weather itself. Victor Kane. Even Clara, who rarely watched the news, recognized that sharp jawline, those cold gray eyes that had stared down senators and CEOs alike. Kane International's billionaire founder didn't belong in a place that served coffee for $2 and called it bottomless. He slid into the booth directly facing Ryan, his presence sucking the warmth from the room like winter through an open door. "Coffee, black. Now." His voice cut through the morning chatter, turning heads and silencing conversations. Clara grabbed the pot with steady hands, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Billionaires didn't stumble into roadside diners. They didn't sit alone, studying teenage boys with predatory intensity. As she poured, a few drops splashed onto his pristine sleeve. The diner froze. Victor's eyes snapped to Clara's face, then slowly traveled to where Ryan sat, pencil suspended mid-calculation. A cruel smile spread across the billionaire's lips, the kind of expression that had crushed competitors and ruined lives. He stood, every eye in the diner following his movement. The silence was so complete, Clara could hear her own pulse. $200 million will be yours, Victor's voice carried to every corner, if your son proves he's worth more than a nobody's kid. Ryan's pencil fell. Coffee cups sat forgotten. Even the cook emerged from the kitchen, spatula dripping. Victor threw a business card on Ryan's textbook and walked out, leaving only the scent of expensive cologne and the echo of impossible words. Ryan stared at the card, hands trembling. Clara felt the walls of her carefully constructed life begin to crumble. Why would a billionaire target them? What did Victor Kane want with her son? Neither of them knew they had just heard the opening move in a game that began 18 years ago, a game that would expose the darkest secret Clara had ever kept. Victor Kane's business card burned like acid in Ryan's pocket for 3 days. Kane International, CEO and founder. And underneath, handwritten in sharp black ink, Friday, prove yourself worthy of breathing the same air. Clara couldn't sleep. She'd catch herself staring at the diner's entrance, waiting for that Italian suit to darken their doorway again. Her hands shook when she poured coffee. Her smile felt painted on. Customers noticed. Mabel, the head waitress, kept shooting her worried glances between orders. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," Mabel whispered during the afternoon lull. "What's got you spooked?" Clara wanted to tell her, wanted to grab Mabel's shoulders and scream that a billionaire had walked into their lives like a hurricane. But how do you explain something that sounds like a fever dream? Instead, she just smiled and said the coffee was too strong this morning. Ryan wasn't handling it better. His grades, perfect since kindergarten, started slipping. Teachers called. He'd zone out mid-lecture, staring at nothing, mind clearly somewhere else. His best friend Marcus tried cracking jokes, but Ryan barely responded. "Dude, what's eating you?" Marcus asked after Ryan ignored another attempt at conversation. "You've been weird since Monday." Ryan wanted to tell him, wanted to say a billionaire had challenged him to prove his worth for $200 million. But Marcus would think he'd lost his mind. Hell, Ryan was starting to think he'd lost his mind. Maybe they'd imagined it. Maybe the stress of MIT tuition had finally cracked them both. But Wednesday morning shattered that hope. Victor Kane returned. Same booth, same predatory stare, same Italian suit that probably cost more than Clara made in 6 months. But this time, he didn't order coffee. He just sat there, watching Ryan like a scientist studying an interesting specimen. Clara approached his table with trembling hands. "Sir, can I get you?" "Nothing." His voice was ice. "I'm simply, observing." For 2 hours, Victor Kane sat in that booth, never ordering, never speaking, just watching Ryan struggle through his morning routine. Customers whispered. Some left early. The entire diner felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Ryan tried focusing on his calculus homework, but those gray eyes burned holes through his concentration. Every equation blurred. Every number swam on the page. He felt like prey being circled by something ancient and hungry. When Victor finally left, he dropped another business card on Ryan's table. This one had an address, the Meridian Hotel, Presidential Suite. Tonight, 8 p.m. Friday was too far away, he said, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "I've decided to accelerate our timeline." Clara's coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor in the explosion of glass and hot liquid. Victor smiled at the sound, the first genuine emotion Ryan had seen cross his face. "Clean that up," Victor told Clara, his tone dripping with disdain. "Some of us have important matters to discuss." He walked out, leaving Clara on her knees, gathering glass fragments with shaking hands. Ryan wanted to help her, but his legs felt like concrete. The business card seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The Meridian Hotel was Dallas's crown jewel, where oil barons and tech moguls stayed when slumming it in Texas. Ryan had never been within 10 blocks of the place. Presidential Suite probably cost more per night than his mother made in 3 months. But he had to go. Whatever game Victor Kane was playing, running away wasn't an option. Not when $200 million could change everything. Not when his mother's dreams hung in the balance. That evening, Ryan stood in the hotel lobby wearing his only decent shirt, a button-down Clara had bought him for last year's school pictures. Italian marble stretched in every direction. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow shadows. Even the air smelled expensive. The elevator to the presidential suite felt like ascending to another planet. Victor answered the door in casual clothes that probably cost more than Ryan's entire wardrobe. The suite behind him looked like a movie set. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas, furniture that belonged in museums, art that probably had its own insurance policies. "You came," Victor said, stepping aside. "Interesting." Ryan entered, every nerve screaming danger. The suite was bigger than his entire house. A dining table sat prepared for 2, covered with files, documents, and what looked like contracts. "Sit," Victor commanded, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than Clara's car. "We have business to discuss." She never saw the real game coming. Most people don't. Subscribe so you're not caught off guard like Clara was. Ryan remained standing. "What do you want with us?" Victor poured himself a glass of wine that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly food budget. "Direct. I appreciate that in subordinates." He took a slow sip, savoring the moment. "Your mother spilled coffee on my suit. In the corporate world, that would be grounds for termination, but I'm feeling generous. $200 million isn't generous, it's impossible. Nothing's impossible for those worthy of achievement." Victor moved to the window, gazing down at the city lights like a king surveying his kingdom. "Tell me, Ryan, What makes you think you deserve anything more than your mother's life? Serving coffee to your betters? Living paycheck to paycheck? Dreaming of colleges you'll never afford? Rage flared in Ryan's chest, but he kept his voice level. My mother works harder than anyone I know. Hard work. Victor laughed, cold and sharp. The consolation prize of the mediocre. The world doesn't reward effort, boy. It rewards results. Excellence. Genetic superiority. Is that what this is about? Some twisted social experiment? Victor turned, those gray eyes gleaming with something hungry. Friday night there's a charity gala. Dallas's elite gather to feel better about themselves by throwing money at causes they'll forget by morning. I want you there. Why? Because, Ryan Monroe, I'm going to give you the chance to prove you're more than your circumstances, more than your bloodline. Victor's smile turned predatory. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to convince a room full of billionaires that you deserve to breathe the same air. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs. And if I fail, then you and your mother learn your place. Forever. Victor moved closer, close enough that Ryan could smell expensive cologne mixed with something colder. But if you succeed, $200 million. MIT tuition becomes pocket change. Your mother never serves another cup of coffee. You join the ranks of those who matter. The offer hung between them like a loaded gun. Ryan thought of Clara's tired eyes, her hands cracked from years of dish soap and hard work. Thought of the MIT letter she carried like a talisman, believing in him even when belief seemed impossible. What's the catch? Smart boy. Victor returned to the window. The catch is simple. You'll be performing without a net, no preparation, no coaching, just you, your supposed intelligence, and 10 minutes to prove genetic destiny wrong. Ryan stared at the contracts on the table, pages of legal text that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. This was insane. Billionaires didn't offer random teenagers life-changing money. There had to be an angle, a trap, something Victor wasn't revealing. But what choice did he have? Walk away and spend the rest of his life wondering? Let his mother work herself to death serving coffee to people who saw her as furniture? I'll do it. Victor's reflection smiled in the window glass. Excellent. A car will collect you and your mother Friday at 7. Formal attire required. He turned back to Ryan, and something dark flickered across his expression. Don't disappoint me, boy. I have very specific expectations for this evening. As Ryan left the suite, Victor's words echoed in his head like a curse. Genetic destiny. Specific expectations. The way those gray eyes had studied him, like he was looking for something particular. What did a billionaire really want with a waitress's son? And why did Ryan feel like he was walking into a trap that had been set long before they'd ever met? The elevator descended toward the lobby, but Ryan felt like he was falling much further than 20 floors. The black Mercedes arrived at Maplewood Diner exactly at 7, its polished surface reflecting neon lights like liquid obsidian. Clara had never ridden in a car that cost more than her annual salary. She smoothed her only dress, a simple black number she'd worn to her sister's funeral 3 years ago, and tried not to think about how out of place they'd look. Ryan adjusted his borrowed tie for the 100th time. Marcus had lent him his father's suit, a navy blue that was slightly too big in the shoulders, but would have to do. They looked like actors playing roles they'd never auditioned for. The Ritz-Carlton Dallas ballroom gleamed with enough crystal to blind satellites. Ice sculptures melted slowly between champagne fountains. Women dripped diamonds like morning dew. Men wore watches worth more than most people's houses. The elite of Texas had gathered to celebrate their own generosity, writing checks that were pocket change but would buy them headlines in society pages. Clara had never felt smaller in her life. Victor Kane held court near the center of the room, surrounded by oil executives and tech moguls who hung on his every word like disciples. He wore a tuxedo that fit like it had been sculpted onto his frame, making every other man look slightly disheveled by comparison. When he spotted Ryan and Clara, his smile could have cut glass. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor's voice carried across the ballroom with practiced authority. "I'd like you to meet some very special guests. Clara Monroe, who ensures I receive proper coffee service, and her son Ryan, who believes intelligence can overcome circumstances." The crowd turned like a single organism, hundreds of eyes analyzing Clara's discount dress and Ryan's borrowed suit. Whispers followed them like smoke. Clara wanted to disappear into the marble floor, but Ryan straightened his shoulders and met their stares head-on. Dr. Harrison Wells, the energy mogul who'd built half of Texas's power grid, stepped forward with curiosity gleaming in his weathered eyes. "Kane, what game are you playing tonight?" "No game, Harrison, just a simple demonstration." Victor gestured to a server, who brought over cocktail napkins and a pen. "Young Ryan here believes he's destined for greatness despite his humble origins. I thought we'd give him a chance to prove it." The crowd gathered closer, sensing entertainment. Blood in the water. 10 minutes, Victor announced, placing a napkin in front of Ryan. "Draft me a business proposal that could revolutionize any industry. Impress this room of actual achievers and you win something extraordinary. Fail." He shrugged eloquently. "Well, failure has its own rewards." Ryan stared at the blank napkin. 10 minutes to prove his worth to people who measured success in billions. Around him, conversations died. Phones appeared, ready to record his humiliation. Clara's face had gone pale as winter frost. But then Ryan thought about his mother's hands cracked from years of serving people who never learned her name. Thought about the MIT letter she carried like a prayer. Thought about every night she'd worked double shifts so he could have textbooks and tutoring. He picked up the pen. The room held its breath. Ryan began sketching, his hand moving with sudden confidence. Not a traditional business plan. Something visual, intuitive, brilliant in its simplicity. Lines became diagrams. Diagrams became systems. Systems became revolution. "Affordable, renewable energy panels for low-income neighborhoods," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Current solar technology costs make it inaccessible to the communities that need it most. But what if we flip the model?" His pen moved faster, showing installation patterns, community ownership structures, government partnership frameworks. Instead of individual ownership, create neighborhood energy cooperatives. 10 families share the cost of one advanced system. Lower individual investment, higher collective return. The government provides installation grants, communities provide maintenance labor, energy companies provide grid integration. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Dr. Wells moved closer, his eyes narrowing with professional interest. Ryan continued, warming to his theme. "But here's the genius part. Excess energy doesn't get sold back to the grid at wholesale prices. It gets stored in community battery systems and redistributed during peak hours. Low-income neighborhoods become energy independent and profitable." The sketches showed distribution networks, profit-sharing models, scalability projections. Ryan's voice carried across the ballroom with growing authority. "Traditional solar requires 20-year payback periods that poor families can't afford. This model pays for itself in 18 months through collective purchasing power and community labor. Every neighborhood becomes a micro-power plant. Every family becomes an energy entrepreneur." The silence that followed felt electric. Dr. Wells stepped forward, his weathered face creased with something approaching awe. "Son, do you realize what you've just outlined?" His voice cracked slightly. "We've been struggling with energy poverty for decades, spending billions on infrastructure that serves the wealthy while the poor pay premium rates for basic electricity." He pointed at Ryan's napkin with a trembling finger. "If this model works, and mathematically it's sound, you'll save us billions in waste while making energy accessible to millions. You've just cracked something we've been wrestling with for years." The crowd erupted, not in laughter, in astonishment. Phones that had been ready to capture humiliation now recorded validation. Energy executives crowded around the napkin, studying Ryan's diagrams like ancient treasure maps. "Brilliant," someone whispered. "Revolutionary," said another. Why didn't we think of this? Victor's smugly confident expression cracked like old paint. His gray eyes darted between Ryan and the admiring crowd, calculating implications he clearly hadn't anticipated. This wasn't supposed to happen. Ryan was supposed to fail, to be dismissed, to prove whatever twisted point Victor was trying to make. Instead, he'd done the impossible. Clara watched her son surrounded by billionaires treating him like an equal. No, like a superior. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy. Pride swelled in her chest until she thought her heart might burst. Mrs. Monroe, Dr. Wells approached her with genuine warmth. You've raised an extraordinary young man. This isn't just intelligence. This is wisdom, compassion, and innovation wrapped into one brilliant mind. Before Clara could respond, reporters materialized as if from thin air. Cameras flashed. Questions flew like bullets. Ryan, where did this idea come from? Will you be pursuing this business model? Are you planning to attend MIT? Ryan handled the attention with remarkable poise, but his eyes kept finding his mother's face in the crowd. She nodded at him, pride radiating like sunshine, giving him strength to stand tall among titans of industry. But across the room, Victor Kane watched with an expression that had shifted from smug superiority to something far more dangerous, something that looked almost like recognition. As the evening wound down and the crowd slowly dispersed, still buzzing about the teenager who'd revolutionized energy policy on a cocktail napkin, Victor approached Ryan one final time. Well played, he said, his voice carrying undertones Ryan couldn't quite identify. But this changes nothing. You've won a battle, not the war. What war? Ryan asked, emboldened by the evening's success. What do you actually want from us? Victor's smile was different now, less predatory, more contemplative. Almost proud? Perhaps the question isn't what I want from you, Ryan. Perhaps it's what you deserve from me. He walked away before Ryan could respond, leaving only questions and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. That night, as Ryan and Clara rode home in the Mercedes, local news stations were already running stories about the small-town genius who'd stunned Dallas's elite. Social media exploded with shares and comments. MIT admissions called before they'd even reached home, offering not just acceptance but a full scholarship. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's game was far from over. The way those gray eyes had studied him like he was looking for something specific. The strange shift in Victor's demeanor after the presentation. What did "what you deserve from me" mean? And why did Ryan suddenly feel like he was standing at the edge of a cliff he couldn't see? Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight brought triumph. But in the shadows of victory, deeper mysteries were beginning to stir. Fame tasted like ashes in Ryan's mouth. 3 days after the charity gala, his renewable energy proposal had gone viral. CNN called. Forbes wanted an interview. MIT professors were emailing directly, offering research positions before he'd even graduated high school. The boy who'd lived invisibly for 18 years was suddenly everywhere, but Ryan couldn't shake the memory of Victor's final words. Perhaps it's what you deserve from me. What had that meant? And why did those gray eyes haunt his dreams like a ghost demanding recognition? Clara tried to embrace the attention, but Ryan noticed how she flinched every time reporters mentioned Victor Kane, how she changed the subject when neighbors asked about their benefactor, how she checked the locks twice before bed and jumped at unexpected sounds. Mom, are you okay? Ryan asked Thursday morning as she spilled sugar across the kitchen counter for the third time. Fine, sweetheart. Just tired. But her hands shook as she cleaned up the mess and her eyes kept darting to the window like she expected to see someone watching. The first letter arrived that afternoon. Clara found it slipped under their front door when she returned from her shift. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in block letters that looked deliberately disguised. Inside, a single sheet of paper with words that turned her blood to ice. He isn't testing your son for sport. He's testing him for blood. Some secrets can't stay buried forever. Some debts must be paid. Ask yourself, Clara, what did you really think would happen when Ryan started looking just like him? Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed into the kitchen chair, the letter fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. 18 years. She'd kept the secret for 18 years, and now it was clawing its way to the surface like something rising from a grave. The front door opened and Ryan walked in, still glowing with the aftermath of another interview. Local news had filmed him at the diner, surrounded by customers who now treated him like a celebrity, instead of the quiet kid who did homework in the corner booth. "Mom?" Ryan's smile faded when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Clara snatched the letter before he could see it, her movements sharp with panic. "Nothing. Just bills." But Ryan had inherited her stubborn streak along with her eyes. He studied her face with the same intensity he'd used to solve calculus problems. Something was wrong. Something more than bills or exhaustion. That night, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling, the anonymous letter burning in her bedside drawer. She thought about that summer in New York 18 years ago. She'd been 19, working as a server at an upscale restaurant, saving money for college. Victor Kane had been 25, reckless with inherited wealth and hungry for anything that made him feel alive. 3 months of stolen moments, secret meetings in expensive hotels, promises whispered against her skin that evaporated like morning mist when reality intruded. When she'd told him about the pregnancy, Victor's face had transformed into something cold and calculating. "Fix it," he'd said, sliding a check across the hotel room table. "This complication doesn't fit my timeline." Clara had torn up the check and walked away. She'd never seen Victor Kane again, until he walked into Maplewood Diner 3 weeks ago and stared at Ryan like he was seeing a ghost. The second letter arrived Friday. This one was waiting in Clara's locker at work, somehow placed there despite the diner's locked doors. Mabel swore no one had been inside since closing the night before. He has Victor's hands, Victor's jaw, Victor's brilliant mind. How long did you think you could hide what's obvious to anyone who looks? The blood remembers, Clara. And Victor Kane never forgets a debt. Clara's shift became a nightmare of dropped plates and spilled coffee. Every customer who walked through the door made her jump. Every phone ring sent ice through her veins. When Mabel finally sent her home early, Clara drove 3 miles out of her way just to make sure no one was following. Ryan found her sitting at the kitchen table that evening staring at nothing. "Mom, talk to me. What's happening?" Clara looked at her son, really looked at him. When had his jawline become so sharp, so familiar? When had his hands grown so elegant, capable of sketching revolutionary ideas on cocktail napkins? When had his eyes developed that intensity that could command a room full of billionaires? "Just stress, honey. All this attention." But Ryan wasn't buying it. He'd spent 18 years reading his mother's moods, learning to interpret every expression and gesture. She was terrified of something, and that terror was growing stronger each day. The third letter came Saturday morning, slipped under the door like a serpent in the night. "Check the dates, Clara. Victor's charity gala, Ryan's performance. The timing isn't coincidence. He's been watching, waiting, planning. Your son impressed those billionaires because Kane blood runs in his veins. But Victor doesn't want a reunion, he wants a reckoning. And reckonings always demand payment." This time, Clara couldn't hide her reaction. A sob escaped her throat before she could stop it, raw and desperate. The letter fell from her trembling fingers as 18 years of carefully buried guilt came crashing down like an avalanche. Ryan appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of his mother's pain. He saw the letter on the floor, saw Clara's tear-streaked face, saw the way she seemed to be crumbling from the inside out. The truth was darker than Ryan imagined, and it's about to get worse. Subscribe before the next revelation destroys everything. "Mom." His voice was gentle but firm. "No more lies. What's in those letters?" Clara looked at her son, her brilliant, beautiful, impossible son, and felt the weight of 18 years of deception crushing down on her. She'd protected him from the truth because she'd thought it was kindness. Now she wondered if it had been cruelty instead. "Ryan," her voice cracked like thin ice, "there are things about your father that I never told you. My father ran off before I was born. You told me he was Victor Kane's younger brother, but he couldn't handle responsibility." The irony was a knife in Clara's chest. She'd needed to give Ryan some connection to explain his intelligence, his natural leadership, his ability to command respect. So she'd invented a fictional younger brother, a man who'd inherited Victor's brilliance but lacked his ruthlessness. That's not exactly true. Ryan sank into the chair across from her, his face pale but determined. Then what is true? Clara stared at the letter on the floor, its words swimming through her tears. How do you tell your child that his father is the man who's been tormenting them? How do you explain 18 years of lies built on love and fear? Your father. She took a shuddering breath. Your father is Victor Kane. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that would consume everything they'd built together. Ryan's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a terrible understanding that connected every strange moment of the past month. The way Victor had studied him at the diner, the cruel games, the impossible challenge, the look in those gray eyes when Ryan had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He's my father, Ryan whispered, the words tasting like poison. Victor Kane is my father, and you never told me. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was 19. He was powerful, wealthy, everything I wasn't. When I got pregnant, he wanted me to. She couldn't finish the sentence. When I refused, he disappeared. I thought he'd forgotten about us. But he didn't forget. Ryan's voice was hollow with shock. He's been planning this. The diner, the challenge, all of it. I think so. Ryan stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He paced the small kitchen like a caged animal, his mind racing through implications and connections. Every interaction with Victor took on new meaning. Every word became loaded with 18 years of abandoned responsibility. He's not testing me, Ryan said, his voice growing stronger with each realization. He's, what? Trying to prove I'm worthy of acknowledgement? Seeing if his genes overcame my circumstances? Clara flinched at the word circumstances, but Ryan was beyond caring about hurt feelings. 18 years of believing his father was a coward, only to discover he was something worse, a billionaire who'd watched from the shadows while his son and mother struggled to survive. What does he want from us now? Ryan asked. Clara looked at the scattered letters, each one more ominous than the last. I don't know, but whoever's sending these, they seem to think Victor's games aren't over. As if summoned by her words, the phone rang. Both of them jumped like it was a gunshot. Ryan answered, his voice carefully controlled. Hello? Ryan? Victor's voice was silk over steel. I think it's time we had a proper conversation, father to son. The line went dead, leaving only the dial tone and the sound of Clara's broken sobs. Outside, Dallas traffic hummed with normal life, people going about their business unaware that a family's world had just collapsed into truth and terror. Ryan stared at the phone in his hand, knowing that whatever came next would be worse than anything they'd faced so far. Victor's phone call echoed in Ryan's mind like a curse. Father to son. 2 words that shattered 18 years of carefully constructed reality. Clara hadn't stopped crying since the revelation. She sat curled in the corner of their threadbare couch, clutching a tissue box like armor against the truth she'd finally unleashed. Every few minutes she'd whisper, I'm sorry, to the empty air, as if apologies could rebuild the foundation of lies that had just crumbled. Ryan couldn't sit still. He paced their small living room, his mind spinning through every interaction with Victor Kane, recontextualizing cruelty as something far more twisted, not a billionaire's random sadism, a father's sick test of the son he'd abandoned. "Tell me everything," Ryan said, his voice barely controlled. "From the beginning, no more lies." Clara looked up with red-rimmed eyes that seemed to have aged a decade in the past hour. "What's the point? You hate me now." "I don't hate you, Mom. But I need the truth." Clara took a shuddering breath and began the story she'd buried for 18 years. New York City, 1989. She was 19, working at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Victor Kane was 25, newly in control of his father's company, reckless with power, and hungry for anything that made him feel alive. "He was different then," Clara whispered. "Charming, funny. He'd come in after board meetings, always alone, always ordering the most expensive wine and barely touching it. He'd talk to me like I mattered, like my opinions on books and art were worth hearing." Ryan felt sick imagining his mother as a teenager, swept up by a man who saw her as entertainment. It lasted 3 months, secret meetings in his penthouse, promises about taking me to Paris, introducing me to his world. Clara's voice turned bitter. "Then I missed my period." The words hung heavy in the air. Ryan thought about his mother at 19, the same age he'd be when he started MIT. She'd been a child herself, carrying a child, facing a man who saw both as inconvenient complications. When I told him, his face... Clara shuddered. It was like watching someone flip a switch. The charm disappeared. He became cold, calculating. He said pregnancy didn't fit his timeline, his image. He slid a check across the table, $50,000 to fix the problem. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. "What did you do?" "I tore up the check and walked out. Never saw him again until..." Her voice broke. "Until 3 weeks ago when he walked into our diner and stared at you like he was seeing a ghost." The timeline clicked into place with horrible clarity. Victor hadn't stumbled into Maplewood Diner by accident. He'd been watching, waiting, planning his reappearance for reasons Ryan couldn't fathom. "Why now?" Ryan asked. "Why after 18 years?" "I don't know, but those letters..." Clara gestured toward the anonymous warnings scattered on their kitchen table. "Someone else knows, someone who's been watching both of us." A chill ran down Ryan's spine. If someone was threatening to expose Victor's secret, that made Ryan and Clara either valuable leverage or dangerous loose ends. Neither option felt safe. The doorbell rang at 11 p.m., sharp and insistent. Both of them froze. Nobody visited them this late. Nobody visited them at all. Ryan moved toward the door, but Clara grabbed his arm. "Don't answer it." The bell rang again, longer this time, followed by heavy knocking that seemed to shake their small house. "Clara, I know you're in there." The voice was muffled, but unmistakably Victor Kane's. "We need to talk. Now." Clara's grip on Ryan's arm tightened like a vice. "He can't be here. He can't just show up at our house." But Victor Kane was a billionaire who owned senators and crushed competitors. Property lines and social conventions meant nothing to men like him. "Open the door, Ryan," Victor called. "Or I'll have it opened for me." Ryan looked at his mother's terrified face and made a decision. Whatever game Victor was playing, running away wouldn't end it. He pulled free from Clara's grip and opened the door. Victor Kane stood on their porch in a casual jacket that probably cost more than their monthly rent. Behind him, a black sedan waited with tinted windows and the kind of presence that suggested very dangerous people inside. "May I come in?" Victor's tone was polite, but his gray eyes held something predatory. "We have family business to discuss." Ryan stepped aside, his jaw clenched with barely controlled rage. Victor entered their humble living room like a king surveying conquered territory. His gaze swept over their second-hand furniture, Clara's ceramic figurines, Ryan's honor roll certificates on the wall. "Cozy," he said, the single word dripping with disdain. Clara stood up from the couch, her face pale, but her voice steady. "What do you want, Victor?" "What I've always wanted. What's mine?" His eyes found Ryan and held them with uncomfortable intensity. 18 years ago, you made a choice, Clara. You kept something that belonged to me. Ryan doesn't belong to anyone, Clara said fiercely. Victor's smile was cold as winter. Genetics would disagree. He moved closer to Ryan, studying his face like a scientist examining a specimen. The jawline is unmistakable, the hands, identical to mine at that age, and the mind. His voice carried something that might have been pride. Brilliant enough to revolutionize energy policy on a cocktail napkin. Ryan jerked away from Victor's scrutiny. If you're my father, why the games, why the cruelty? Because, my boy, I had to know if 18 years of poverty had ruined what I contributed to your creation. Victor's words were clinical, detached. I had to see if my genes could overcome your circumstances. The casual cruelty of it staggered Ryan. His mother's struggles, his own dreams and fears, reduced to a genetic experiment by the man who'd created and abandoned him. And what's your verdict? Ryan asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Promising, very promising. Victor reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio. Which is why we need to discuss your future. He thought Victor was his enemy, but the truth was so much worse. Only subscribers will see how this family survives what's coming next. My future's MIT, then whatever I make of it. MIT. Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Small dreams for a cane. I'm offering you something far more valuable than a college education. He opened the portfolio, revealing documents that made Ryan's head spin. Corporate structures, trust funds, adoption papers that would legally make Ryan his heir. 200 million was never a prize, Victor said softly. It was an inheritance test, and you passed brilliantly. Clara stepped forward, her fear transforming into maternal fury. You can't just buy him. He's not a commodity. Everything is a commodity, Clara, even family. Victor's attention never left Ryan. I'm offering you a place in my world. Real power. The ability to change industries, influence governments, shape the future of human civilization. Ryan stared at the papers, his mind reeling. Everything he'd ever wanted. Resources, influence, the ability to implement his ideas on a global scale, laid out before him like bait in a trap. What's the catch? Simple. Victor's smile turned predatory. You come with me tonight. Leave this place. Leave her. Leave the small dreams that have held you back for 18 years. Embrace what your blood demands. And if I refuse? Victor's expression darkened. Then you remain Ryan Monroe, son of a waitress, destined for middle-class mediocrity despite your gifts. And Clara... His gaze shifted to Ryan's mother with cold calculation. Clara faces the consequences of 18 years of theft. Theft? Clara's voice cracked. You stole my son. Raised him without my knowledge, without my resources, without my guidance. That has legal implications, Clara, financial implications. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Ryan understood the message. Accept Victor's offer or watch his mother face legal and financial destruction from the most ruthless man in corporate America. You bastard, Ryan whispered. Careful, son. That bastard is offering you everything you've ever dreamed of. Victor's voice carried paternal authority that made Ryan's skin crawl. But the offer expires tonight. Choose now. Poverty with principle, or power with purpose. Ryan looked at his mother, who was trying so hard to be brave despite the tears streaming down her face. Then at the documents that represented a future beyond his wildest imagination. Then at the man who'd abandoned them both and returned only when Ryan had proven himself worthy of acknowledgement. The choice seemed impossible. But as Ryan stared into Victor Kane's gray eyes, his own eyes, he realized with sick certainty, he understood something crucial. This wasn't about money or power or even family. This was about the kind of man he wanted to become. And that choice, at least, was entirely his own. I need time to think, Ryan said finally. Victor's smile was sharp as a knife. You have until tomorrow night. After that, the offer disappears forever, and Clara learns what happens to those who steal from Victor Kane. He left as suddenly as he'd arrived, taking his threats and promises with him. Clara and Ryan sat in silence, surrounded by the wreckage of everything they'd thought they knew about their lives. Outside, Dallas slept peacefully, unaware that a family was being torn apart by 18 years of buried secrets and the cruel mathematics of power. Ryan held his mother as she cried, but his mind was already racing toward tomorrow night and the choice that would determine not just his future, but his soul. Dawn came like Judgment Day, painting their small kitchen in shades of gold that felt too beautiful for the darkness consuming their lives. Clara hadn't slept. She sat at the table staring at Victor's business card like it might spontaneously combust, while coffee grew cold in her trembling hands. Ryan found her there, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow with exhaustion. "Mom." She looked up, and Ryan saw something broken in her expression that went deeper than fear or regret. She looked like someone who'd spent the night staring into an abyss that had stared back. "I ruined everything," Clara whispered. "If I'd just told you the truth from the beginning." "Then what? I would have spent 18 years knowing my father was a monster who abandoned us?" Ryan sat across from her, his own voice raw from a sleepless night. "You protected me, Mom. You gave me a childhood where I could believe I was wanted." Clara's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Wanted? Victor made it clear 18 years ago that you were anything but wanted." The words hung between them like a physical wound. Ryan thought about Victor's clinical assessment the night before, testing whether his genes could overcome Ryan's circumstances, as if poverty were a genetic defect instead of an economic reality. "Tell me about him," Ryan said quietly. "The real him. Not the billionaire, not the businessman. What was he like when you thought you loved him?" Clara closed her eyes, and for a moment her face softened with memory. Brilliant. Genuinely brilliant. He could explain complex financial theories in ways that made perfect sense, then turn around and discuss literature or art with the same depth. "I thought I was lucky that someone so intelligent would notice someone like me." What changed? The pregnancy changed everything. The moment I told him, it was like watching Dr. Jekyll become Mr. Hyde. Clara's voice turned hollow. He didn't see a child we'd created. He saw a problem that threatened his image, his timeline, his perfectly ordered world. Ryan tried to imagine his mother at 19, younger than he was now, facing rejection from someone she'd trusted with her heart. The cruelty of it made his chest tight with rage. "When you tore up that check and walked away, did you ever think about coming back? Trying to make him understand?" "Every day for months," Clara admitted. "I'd stand outside Kane International's headquarters, holding you in my arms, trying to work up the courage to march into his office and force him to see what he was missing. But then I'd remember his face when I'd told him about the pregnancy, the disgust, the immediate calculation of how to eliminate the problem." She opened her eyes, looking directly at Ryan. "I realized he didn't deserve to know you. Didn't deserve to watch you take your first steps, say your first words, win your first academic award. He'd made his choice, and I made mine. But he found us anyway. 18 years later, when you'd already become the man I raised you to be, when he could see the results without having to invest in the process." Clara's voice carried a bitterness that surprised Ryan. "He wants to claim credit for your brilliance, while accepting no responsibility for the struggles that shaped it." Ryan stood and began pacing, a habit he'd inherited from his mother during times of stress. The documents Victor had left were spread across their coffee table like evidence of a crime. Adoption papers, trust fund transfers, corporate structures that would make Ryan heir to a billion-dollar empire. "What if he's right?" Ryan asked, the words tasting like poison. "What if I am wasting my potential here? What if I could change the world if I had his resources?" Clara flinched as if he'd slapped her. "You think you need his blood money to make a difference?" "I think I need resources to implement ideas. MIT is expensive, but starting a renewable energy company? Revolutionizing entire industries? That takes capital I'll never have working my way up from nothing. So you'd abandon everything we built together for a shortcut to power? The pain in her voice made Ryan stop pacing. He looked at his mother, really looked at her. The woman who'd worked double shifts so he could have tutoring, who'd sacrificed her own dreams so he could pursue his, who'd protected him from a truth that would have poisoned his childhood with rejection and abandonment. "I'm not abandoning you," Ryan said softly. "But what if I could take his resources and use them for good? What if I could turn his billions into something that actually helps people? And what happens to you in the process?" Clara stood up, moving to the window that overlooked their small backyard. "Power changes people, Ryan. I've seen it happen. Victor wasn't always the monster who threatened us last night. He became that monster gradually, one compromise at a time." Ryan joined her at the window, both of them staring at the vegetable garden Clara had planted in their tiny yard, tomatoes and peppers growing in neat rows, tended with the same careful attention she'd given to raising him. "Maybe I'm stronger than that. Maybe you are. But what if you're not?" Clara turned to face him, and Ryan saw fear mixed with fierce love in her eyes. What if accepting his world means losing the part of yourself that makes you special? The part that cares more about helping people than accumulating power? The question hit deeper than Ryan expected. He thought about the renewable energy proposal that had impressed the billionaires. It hadn't been designed to make him rich or powerful. It had been designed to help communities like the one he'd grown up in. Communities where families chose between heating bills and groceries, where potential was often wasted because opportunity was scarce. "He said I had small dreams," Ryan said slowly. "Called MIT a small dream. MIT isn't small. It's the beginning of something bigger. But Victor's version of big always comes with a cost." Clara moved closer, placing her hands on Ryan's shoulders. "I won't stop you if you choose to go with him. I won't guilt you or manipulate you or make demands. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "The man who raised you wasn't Victor Kane. The man who taught you right from wrong, who showed you how to treat people with dignity, who instilled in you the values that impressed those billionaires. That man was you. You raised yourself, Ryan. With my support, yes, but your character, your integrity, your brilliance, those came from you." Tears prickled Ryan's eyes. He'd never thought about it that way before. Every moral choice, every moment of compassion, every decision to help others instead of advancing himself. Those hadn't come from genetics or inheritance. They'd come from watching his mother treat every customer at the diner with respect, regardless of how they treated her. From learning that dignity wasn't something money could buy or poverty could steal. What if I take his offer and stay true to who I am? Use his resources, but keep my values? Clara's smile was sad, but proud. Then you'll be a better man than your father ever was, but you'll also be walking into a world that's designed to corrupt those values. A world where Victor Kane has had 50 years to perfect the art of making good people compromise themselves. The phone rang, cutting through their conversation like a blade. Both of them stared at it, knowing instinctively who was calling. Ryan answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Victor. Have you made your decision?" Victor's voice carried the impatience of a man accustomed to immediate gratification. "I have conditions." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Already negotiating? Good. That's Kane blood asserting itself. If I come with you, my mother is off limits forever. No legal threats, no financial harassment, no contact of any kind." "Agreed. What else?" "Complete autonomy over how I use the resources you're offering. No interference in my projects or decisions. Within reason. I won't fund anything that damages Kane International's interests." "Then we don't have a deal." The silence stretched so long Ryan wondered if Victor had hung up. Finally, "You'd walk away from $200 million over creative control?" "I'd walk away from $2 billion if the strings attached would turn me into you." Another pause. Longer this time. When Victor spoke again, his tone carried something Ryan couldn't identify. Respect, maybe, or perhaps recognition of something familiar and unwelcome. You're more like me than you know, boy. That same stubborn pride. That same inability to accept anything less than complete control. Victor's voice turned contemplative. Very well. Complete autonomy over resource allocation. But in exchange, you give me 1 year, 12 months to show you what real power can accomplish. And after that year, you make your own choice about your future. Stay in my world or return to your mother's. But you make that choice with full knowledge of what both options truly mean. Ryan looked at Clara, who was watching his face with desperate intensity. He thought about the renewable energy proposal, about all the ideas he'd sketched in notebooks but could never afford to implement, about communities that needed help he couldn't provide with good intentions alone. 1 year, 12 months to see if he could take Victor's power and use it for good. 12 months to prove that genetics didn't determine destiny. I need tonight to think about it. You have until midnight. After that, the offer disappears forever. The line went dead, leaving Ryan and Clara alone with the weight of an impossible choice and 12 hours to decide the trajectory of their lives. Outside, Dallas hummed with ordinary Sunday afternoon life, unaware that a family's future hung in the balance of a decision that would define not just what Ryan would become, but who. Midnight came like a guillotine blade, swift, final, unavoidable. Ryan stood in their small living room, watching the digital clock on their microwave count down the seconds to Victor's deadline. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes to decide between the life he'd always known and a future that terrified him as much as it tempted him. Clara sat on their threadbare couch, her hands folded in her lap with forced calm. They'd talked for hours, going in circles through arguments and emotions, but in the end, the choice belonged to Ryan alone. She'd made that clear, even as her heart was breaking. Whatever you decide, Clara had said at 11:30, I'm proud of who you've become. Victor's billions can't change that. 11:59 p.m. Ryan closed his eyes and thought about the renewable energy proposal that had stunned Dallas's elite. Not because it would make him rich, but because it would help families like theirs afford electricity without choosing between heat and groceries. That impulse, to use brilliance for compassion rather than conquest, that was who he was. Victor's genetics might have given him intelligence, but Clara's love had given him purpose. The phone rang at exactly midnight. Ryan answered without hesitation. I'll come with you, but I need 48 hours to arrange things here. 12 hours. Victor's voice was sharp with victory. A car will collect you at noon tomorrow. 24 hours final offer. A pause that stretched like eternity. Then, 24 hours. Don't disappoint me, son. The line went dead, leaving Ryan and Clara staring at each other across the wreckage of their old life. Clara stood and wrapped her arms around him, holding tight enough to memorize the moment. Promise me something, she whispered against his shoulder. Anything. Promise me you'll come back when you're ready. Not when Victor allows it, not when it's convenient for his plans. When you're ready to be the man you choose to be. I promise, Mom. This isn't goodbye forever. But as Clara held her son in their small living room, surrounded by 18 years of memories built on love and sacrifice, she wondered if promises could survive in Victor Kane's world of power and corruption. The next 24 hours blurred together like a fever dream. Lawyers arrived at dawn with papers to sign, custody transfers that made Ryan sick to read, financial agreements that protected Clara but felt like buying her silence. The local news crew wanted one last interview with the small-town genius before he left for advanced educational opportunities with his recently discovered family connections. Ryan gave them nothing but polite deflection and hollow smiles. Marcus came by in the afternoon, confused and hurt by the sudden announcement that Ryan was leaving Dallas. I don't get it, man. You got into MIT, full scholarship. Why are you bailing to go live with some billionaire uncle you never mentioned before? Ryan wanted to tell him the truth, that the billionaire wasn't his uncle but his father, that this was an opportunity but a devil's bargain wrapped in designer suits. But the NDA Victor's lawyers had required meant silence about their real relationship. It's complicated, Ryan said finally. Family stuff. Marcus stared at him with the intuition of a lifelong friend. This doesn't feel right. You're scared of something. I'm fine. No, you're not. You've been different since that night at the charity gala, like you're carrying something heavy that you can't put down. Marcus grabbed Ryan's shoulders, forcing eye contact. Whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone. For a moment, Ryan almost cracked, almost told Marcus everything and begged for help, escaping a choice that felt more like a trap with each passing hour. But then he thought about Clara's worried face, about the legal threats Victor had made, about communities that needed clean energy solutions only billions could fund. I have to do this, Ryan said quietly, but I'll stay in touch. I promise. Marcus hugged him goodbye, but Ryan could feel the distance already growing between them. Victor's world demanded isolation from anything that might anchor Ryan to his old values. At 11:45 a.m., a black Mercedes pulled up outside Maplewood Diner, the same car that had taken them to the charity gala, but this time it felt more like a hearse than a limousine. Clara walked Ryan to the car, her face composed but her hands shaking. Remember who you are, she whispered, as the driver loaded Ryan's single suitcase. Remember what matters. I love you, Mom. I love you too. Always. Ryan slid into the Mercedes and watched through tinted windows as Clara grew smaller and smaller, until she disappeared entirely behind Dallas traffic and distance. The private jet waiting at Love Field was obscene in its luxury. Leather seats that cost more than most cars, a full bar, technology that made Ryan's head spin. But all Ryan could think about was his mother standing alone in the parking lot of Maplewood Diner, wondering if she'd just lost her son forever. New York City emerged from the clouds like a promise and a threat. Glass towers stretched toward heaven, each one representing more wealth and power than Ryan had ever imagined. Somewhere in that jungle of steel and ambition was Kane International, the empire Victor had built on ruthlessness and calculated cruelty. The helicopter that met them at JFK swept across Manhattan like a metallic predator, offering Ryan a god's-eye view of the city that never slept. Central Park looked like a green postage stamp surrounded by monuments to human ambition. The Hudson River reflected skyscrapers like a mirror showing the city's soul. Kane International's headquarters rose 57 floors into the Manhattan sky, its black glass surface reflecting clouds and sunlight in patterns that seemed to shift with Victor's mood. The helicopter landed on the building's roof, where Victor waited in another perfectly tailored suit. "Welcome to your inheritance," he said, his voice carrying over the helicopter's dying rotors. Ryan followed Victor into an elevator that descended through floors of corporate power he couldn't begin to comprehend. Trading floors where billions changed hands with casual gestures. Conference rooms where decisions were made that affected entire countries. Executive suites where men and women discussed human lives like chess pieces. Victor's office occupied the entire 57th floor, with windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan that made Ryan dizzy with vertigo. The furnishings were museum quality, the art worth more than most people's houses, the technology bleeding edge enough to control satellites or topple governments. Impressive? Victor asked, noting Ryan's expression. Overwhelming. You'll adjust. Kane blood adapts quickly to power. Victor moved to a wall covered with monitors showing stock prices, news feeds, global data streams that painted the world in numbers and trends. Your first lesson begins immediately. We have a board meeting in 30 minutes. They walked into a trap 18 years in the making. If you're not subscribed, you'll miss the moment that changes everything. Ryan's stomach dropped. Board meeting? Kane International's quarterly review. 67 board members, each representing billions in assets. I'm introducing you as my heir apparent. Victor's smile was sharp as broken glass. Consider it your entrance exam. The boardroom was cathedral massive, with a table that could seat armies and windows offering views that made the city look like a toy model. 67 of the most powerful people in corporate America filled chairs worth more than Ryan's childhood home, each one studying him with predatory interest. Ryan recognized some faces from magazine covers and news programs: oil executives who decided gas prices, tech moguls who controlled information flow, media titans who shaped public opinion. They looked at him like wolves evaluating fresh meat. Victor called the meeting to order with casual authority that made senators seem like schoolchildren. Financial reports were discussed in numbers so large they lost meaning. Mergers were approved that would eliminate thousands of jobs with the stroke of a pen. Environmental regulations were dismissed as obstacles to profit rather than protections for human survival. Ryan listened in growing horror as decisions were made that would affect millions of lives, all couched in corporate language that sanitized the human cost of infinite growth. "Before we adjourn," Victor announced, his voice cutting through the boardroom like a blade, "I'd like to introduce someone special. My son, Ryan Kane." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Ryan with new intensity, calculating the implications of Victor's announcement. He'd just become the most valuable piece on the board, heir to an empire built on power and compromise. But as Ryan looked around the room at faces that had forgotten what compassion meant, at people who measured worth in stock prices and quarterly earnings, he realized something that changed everything. He didn't want to inherit this world. He wanted to change it. And that realization would make what came next either the greatest triumph or the most catastrophic mistake of his young life. The boardroom felt like a coliseum. 67 pairs of predatory eyes watching Ryan with the focused intensity of creatures smelling blood in the water. Victor's announcement hung in the air like poison gas. My son, Ryan Kane, transforming Ryan from invisible teenager to the most valuable target in corporate America. Ladies and gentlemen, Victor continued, his voice carrying the casual authority of a man who'd never been refused anything, Ryan will be joining Kane International immediately as heir apparent. I trust you'll extend him every courtesy as he learns the family business. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ryan caught fragments of whispered speculation. Didn't know Kane had a son. Where's he been hiding? Kid looks nervous. Wonder what this means for succession planning. Dr. Margaret Stevenson, the steel-haired CEO of Stevenson Energy, leaned forward with calculating eyes. Victor, this is quite a surprise. What qualifications does young Ryan possess for such a significant role? Before Victor could answer, Ryan stood up. Every conversation died instantly. With respect, Dr. Stevenson, I think the question isn't what qualifications I have, but what this company plans to do with the power it wields. The silence that followed was so complete, Ryan could hear his own heartbeat. Victor's expression shifted from confident pride to something approaching alarm. Ryan looked around the room at faces that had forgotten what conscience meant, at people who'd traded their humanity for stock options and quarterly bonuses. These were the individuals who decided whether communities had clean water, whether families could afford health care, whether the planet would survive another generation of corporate greed. I've spent the last week learning about Kane International's operations, Ryan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The oil spills you've covered up in Nigeria, the toxic waste dumps you've hidden in Louisiana, the renewable energy patents you've bought just to bury them. Victor half rose from his chair. Ryan, I'm not finished. Ryan's voice cut through Victor's interruption with surprising authority. You want to know my qualifications? I've lived in the world your decisions create. I've watched my mother choose between heating bills and groceries because energy companies like ours prioritize profit over people. The room erupted in angry murmurs, but Ryan pressed on. You see quarterly earnings. I see communities that can't afford electricity. You see environmental regulations as obstacles. I see children with asthma from the pollution you refuse to clean up. Ryan's eyes found Victor's face, seeing something crack behind the billionaire's composed mask. You measure success in stock prices. I measure it in lives changed for the better. Dr. Harrison Wells, the energy mogul who'd validated Ryan's renewable proposal, stood up slowly. Young man, those are noble sentiments, but business requires practical considerations. Practical considerations? Ryan's laugh was sharp with righteous anger. Like the $2.3 billion you spent last year on executive bonuses while laying off 12,000 workers? Like the $800 million in lobbying funds you used to block clean energy legislation? The numbers hit the room like physical blows. These weren't public figures. Ryan had accessed Kane International's internal reports, data these executives thought would never see daylight. How do you have access to confidential financial data? Dr. Stevenson's voice was dangerously quiet. Ryan looked directly at Victor, whose face had gone pale with understanding. Because Victor Kane is my father, and for the past week he's been showing me everything. Every dirty deal, every covered-up disaster, every life you've destroyed in pursuit of profit. The confession detonated like a bomb in the sealed boardroom. 67 of the most powerful people in America suddenly understood they were looking at Victor Kane's son, his heir, his successor, his genetic legacy standing before them, demanding they justify 18 years of corporate atrocities. But here's what Victor didn't expect, Ryan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. He thought exposing me to power would corrupt me. He thought showing me wealth would make me hungry for more. Instead, it showed me exactly what I never want to become. Victor finally found his voice. Sit down, Ryan. You don't understand the complexities. I understand perfectly. Ryan turned to face his father, and everyone in the room saw 18 years of abandonment and rage crystallize into something pure and deadly. You wanted to test whether I was worthy of your legacy. Well, here's my answer. Your legacy isn't worth inheriting. The room exploded into chaos. Board members shouted over each other, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits, calculating the stock implications of public family warfare. But Ryan's voice cut through the noise like a sword through fog. You want to know what I'd do with $200 million? I'll tell you. He moved to the presentation screen, his presence commanding attention despite his youth. With swift, confident strokes, he began sketching the same kind of diagram that had revolutionized the charity gala. Community-owned renewable energy cooperatives in every low-income neighborhood in America. Not profit centers, service centers. Not corporate structures, human structures. His hand moved across the screen with practiced precision. Every dollar reinvested in the community. Every kilowatt-hour dedicated to lifting people up instead of keeping them down. The sketch showed networks of solar panels, battery storage systems, job training programs, educational initiatives. Not a business model, a revolution. You measure success in stock prices and quarterly earnings. I measure it in families that don't have to choose between heat and medicine, in communities that control their own power instead of being controlled by it. Ryan's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. In children who grow up believing they can change the world instead of being crushed by it. Dr. Wells stared at the presentation with something approaching awe. The logistics alone would require exactly the kind of resources this company wastes on private jets and golden parachutes. Ryan turned back to the room, and 67 titans of industry saw something that terrified them. A young man with Victor Kane's intelligence but Clara Monroe's compassion. $200 million could transform energy access for 10 million Americans. Instead, you'll spend it on stock buybacks and executive retreats. Victor finally stood, his face a mask of rage and something deeper, disappointment that his son had chosen conscience over power. You're making a mistake, Ryan. This idealistic nonsense won't survive contact with reality. The world doesn't reward good intentions. Maybe not, but it should reward good actions. Ryan looked his father directly in the eyes, and Victor saw something that made his blood run cold. Himself at 25, before corporate power had calcified his soul into profit margins and quarterly reports. I don't want your money, Victor. I don't want your company. I don't want your legacy of exploitation and environmental destruction. Then what do you want? Ryan's smile was sad but genuine. I want you to use that $200 million for something that matters. Fund renewable energy projects in communities that need them. Create jobs for people you've laid off. Clean up the environmental damage you've caused. He paused, letting the words sink in. Be the father I needed 18 years ago. Not the corporate predator you became. This ending will restore your faith in justice, but only if you subscribe to see stories that matter. The room erupted again, but this time the chaos carried different energy. Board members were calculating, whispering, reconsidering. Some looked ashamed for the first time in decades. Others looked terrified of a young man who'd just exposed their darkest secrets to internal scrutiny. But Victor Kane stood frozen, staring at his son like he was seeing a ghost. The ghost of the man he might have been if he'd chosen differently at 25. The meeting is adjourned, Victor said quietly, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. As board members filed out in stunned silence, Ryan walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. 57 floors below, millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that a teenager had just declared war on the corporate structures that controlled their futures. Victor approached slowly like someone walking toward an execution. You've just destroyed everything I've built. No, Ryan said without turning around. I've just given you a chance to build something worth leaving behind. When Ryan finally turned to face his father, Victor saw tears in those gray eyes that looked exactly like his own had looked 30 years ago, before power had taught him that compassion was weakness and conscience was expensive. I'm going home, Ryan said simply. Back to Dallas, back to my mother, back to the life you tried to buy me away from. And if I don't fund your renewable energy projects, if I continue business as usual? Ryan's smile was gentle but implacable. Then I'll fund them myself. One family at a time, one community at a time, one solar panel at a time. It'll take longer without your billions, but it'll mean more because it's built on love instead of guilt. As Ryan walked toward the elevator that would carry him away from power and back toward purpose, Victor Kane stood alone in his cathedral of corporate achievement, surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt as empty as his abandoned conscience. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered with the dreams and struggles of 8 million people, each one deserving better than the world Victor had helped create. For the first time in 30 years, Victor Kane wondered if it was too late to become the man his son already was. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, taking Ryan Monroe back toward Dallas, back toward Clara, back toward a future built on hope instead of exploitation. Behind him, Victor Kane stared at his reflection in the windows, seeing not a billionaire CEO but a father who'd finally learned the difference between success and worth. The city lights twinkled below like stars, each one representing a life that could be changed. If a man had the courage to choose redemption over reputation, love over legacy, and hope over the hollow promises of corporate power. Outside, New York hummed with the energy of 8 million dreamers, while inside Kane International's headquarters, two men, father and son, had just discovered that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or power, but the courage to choose who you become despite where you come from.